special call meeting. Today is October 28th, and we are convening today for the review and discussion for update to zoning code chapter 17. Our last meeting was a very robust, energetic, and I believe fruitful meeting. So I want to thank you all for being here and to thank those of you who are joining us on today. We're excited, Bill and Sylvia, to dive in. So this meeting is officially called to order, and Madam Clerk, if you would lead us in the roll call.
Mayor Benson,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Varner, Councilmember Burt, Councilmember Payton, Councilmember Reeves,
Present.
Councilmember Stewart, Councilmember Thomas.
Here.
Mayor, we do have a quorum.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask my colleague to the left, Councilmember Payton, if he would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. And I'm going to ask that Councilmember Reeves, if he would lead us in the invocation, and not in that order. Okay.
Let us pray. Father God, we just thank you for this opportunity to come together. I'm just so thankful for the people here in this room today and those that aren't, those who are joining us from other places. And I'm just thankful that you've given us the task you've given us, and I'm so thankful for everyone rising to the occasion and that we're working hard to do your will for your people in all things. And so be with us today and let us, all of our decisions and discussions lead to a victory for everyone, certainly for our citizens and for our staff and employees, and everyone in this beautiful, wonderful city. So we thank you for this opportunity, and we praise you in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, I would like to ask the board if I could get a motion for the approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and second. Please vote. Missing one line.
Councilmember Payton, have you voted?
Yeah.
Thank you. It's just not showing up on my side. There are 5 in favor.
Thank you very much. All right. Ms. Smith, please take us away.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Happy Monday. So today is our zoning code update, and this is the last half of our update. You have 2 packages in front of you. The one that's in the green packet is what we're going to talk about first. And I know that at our last meeting, you talked about being able to see the red lines, and so that yellow packet is from the red lines, and we'll discuss that towards the end of the session. So here with me today is Bill Spivey, our senior planner. Bill's been here a little over a month, and also Tina Tebow, and I think you all know Tina. Tina is our planning tech. So both of them will be speaking today.
I'm actually 2 months today.
2 months today, I apologize.
Happy anniversary.
Okay, so the purpose of this is to update the zoning code to help manage urban growth and development, ensuring that land use is compatible and beneficial to the community, and prevent incompatible land uses from being adjacent to one another, as we call spot zoning. and also to promote the health, safety, prosperity, and orderly development. Our mission. Our mission is to encourage development that improves and enhances the quality of life for all residents for the city of McDonough, to increase the understanding of planning, zoning, and the development process. Zoning code update. Today, I know we have a robust schedule and we will try to get through this as fast as possible. But the first thing is we're going to talk about the background of the comprehensive plan, the City of McDonough suburbs, what is zoning, standard design, site design standards, wireless communication, administration, enforcement, sign code, tree conservation, next steps, and Q&A session. And at the end of that, we'll talk about the red lines from the previous zoning code update that we did on Thursday. Background on the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is a requirement by DCA, which is the Department of Community Affairs, and it's for local governments to prepare, adopt, maintain, and implement the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan provides the vision for how we want the city to look. It defines a space of quality investment and how the city conducts business professionally and enriches our community. It creates an environment of predictability for business investments, property owners, and the general public. And also it maintains our QLG status, that's our qualified local government status. And in order for us to maintain our city ordinances and the things that we do within the city, as well as receive federal funding, we have to be in compliance with the comprehensive plan. And also our comprehensive plan is part of what creates our zoning code. So I don't know if you've heard, I know I talked about this on Thursday, and some of you may or may not have heard, but there was an article that came out approximately maybe 2-3 months ago. They talked about 2 Georgia suburbs that are among the fastest growing in the nation. And so the city of McDonough actually is ranked 20, and that for the average price of homes under $500,000. And so when they looked at that, if you look at the bottom section under section 18 of this, this was in July of 2024, and they used a ratio of 9%, anything that was over 9%, and that's how they got their, where you ranked. And the city of McDonough ranked 13.93%. So with that, that tells me that in terms of the city of McDonough, it's going to continue to grow, and we have to get ready. And so part of this zoning code update is to make sure that we're ready for future development. What is zoning? Zoning is a regulatory tool used to implement the vision of the comprehensive plan and create the development patterns adopted for long-term growth. And that's what the zoning code update is. So we'll go ahead, and I know you're ready to get into the deep weeds of things, and so I will turn this over to Bill Spivey to talk about our draft. And the first item will be site design standards.
Good morning. This section is bigger than the last one, so we're going to move pretty fast. Okay, site design standards. The first section is sidewalks and street trees. For sidewalks and street trees, there are general requirements by size. You can see for sidewalks, there's 4 foot, 8 foot, 10 foot. There's also information on internal pedestrian pathways. That's for big parking lots, like Walmart or Publix, or where you have access and you don't have to walk through the parking lot. There'll be sidewalks to the side so you can walk from the one sidewalk to the next without crossing through the traffic. Also, street trees. 1 tree for every 40 feet of road frontage. So that's the front yard tree requirement. Maintenance of sidewalks is owner or occupant of the building or lot. That's their job to go out and sweep it off, pick up the trash, etc. Additionally, there's easements that you have to get written permission of the easement holder to put a sidewalk there. Any questions?
Bill, what is our current width of our sidewalks? Is that 4 feet? Okay,
And we're working, this will change everything.
all right, 5 feet.
For a local street, that's the neighborhood, 8 for a collector and 10 for arterials.
Has there been any consideration of 6 feet for local streets instead of 5?
That's fine, if you want 6, I'll make it 6.
I'd
That's fine
like
with
to
me.
have some discussion about that. The rationale is the width will accommodate mobility, better mobility. You've got a lot of parents that use strollers and have multiple children that are walking with them, and there are other reasons as well, but that's what immediately comes to mind.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I definitely agree too, because you're watching, people walk on the sidewalks, stroller or wheelchair, whatever,
If you look over time, they've gotten wider and wider as, it used to be 36.
I just have one other question in that regard, and that is, typically when we put sidewalks in, they're all linear, but I think it's more interesting when we are winding our sidewalks, and to the greatest extent, if we could follow some type of winding nature as opposed to just everything has to go straight.
Well, it's going to depend on the amount of right of way, if you have enough to waive or not. I've been in neighborhoods where, and the only thing is when I walk on those, it's a little aggravating because you're trying to get somewhere. And
I'm not talking about steep winding, but oftentimes we'll just mow down all the trees when we could have very easily just taken a slight detour around the trees. So I would think that would be where, you just showed a picture that depicted it beautifully in the PowerPoint earlier. It just, that's following the land, but it's just more visually interesting when you can establish a winding nature.
that's a nice promenade on the river, so. Okay, any other questions? Yes, sir.
On the maintenance of the sidewalks, owner, occupant of any building or lot, that's great. I do have, but actually, I guess, the concrete breaking or whatever, obviously the city is going to take care of that. And then there's a little strip between the sidewalk and the curb. And I've had citizens, whenever I've lived somewhere and had that, I want to take care of it because I want it to match up with my lawn. But then I have some citizens who are calling me now and saying, hey, y'all don't cut the little strip anymore. I want to say, gee,
Right.
can't you cut it? But anyway, if we make clear that responsibility, I guess maybe that responsibility is clear now. But
Well, let me look it up, because other states I've lived, that's part of the right of way. It's a public right of way, but you still own the property underneath it, and it's your responsibility to mow it.
So let me say this, we can add some provisions in there for that, but also if we're implementing an HOA for the communities, that could be part of their covenants that they have in there for the requirements as well.
And it just looks bad when one resident takes care of it, then the next one doesn't.
Oh, yeah, I'm familiar with that.
I think if we could just use as an example Brush Arbor. A lot of the problems, some of the problems that we're having now dealing with the trees are in that strip. And so now the city is being asked to remove the trees. So if we could just look at that design in particular, I think it will help us to inform the design standard that we want to
Been down
implement.
Rush Harbor. There's a mix of trees, like the maples, they're not a problem. they're not gonna tear up the sidewalk. You have some different oaks, and theirs are the ones that are doing it. But there's ways to do the sidewalk over their roots, but you'll have to do it every few years, or like we did in New Orleans, we built like a little wooden deck. It went over the roots and then down. So we didn't have to cut down the tree, but really the standard for that mow strip along the road is 5 feet. So we may need to increase it if we're gonna put a tree in that.
Or we might say that we don't put trees in
Right.
those areas, but I think if we just look at that as a model for what we should do differently, it will give us some insight. And this brush arbor is beautiful. We just have incurred a lot of problems because of the way we designed it.
Well, when I redid the tree list, I took out the ones that I knew were trouble trees. It was like a live oak, that's to be planted on a large lawn. Or, red oak. Red oaks are horrible. I used to maintain the trees responsible for the trees in the CBD of New Orleans, and I learned a lot about trees. But I know which ones do not make good street trees. Any other questions? All right. Next is landscaping standards. Applicability, how is it applied? We have a landscape plan. This is what is required, just be in the landscape plan. You have specifications, preparation for the soil, certification, which means by a landscape architect, irrigation plans, and landscape planning standards, which is basically how do you plant the tree and plant it properly. Additionally, we have approved landscape materials. That's a big list. It tells you what type of trees based on large, medium, small, and then you get into shrubs, ground covers, and grasses. I expanded the list from what it was. So as you can see, for residential, one medium to large tree and one small tree for every 40 feet of street. And for one shrub for every 200 square feet of impervious surface. Any questions?
I do have a question, but I'll defer. Anybody else have a question right now? Councilman
Yes, sir.
Reed.
I'm the guy that's like, wow, you can't have too many trees and shrubs and all that, but I know you can, and then I know we gotta be reasonable.
Right.
So I can't see this in my head, but I know you can. So I'm just, is this a minimum amount that you think or have you considered, and it's more than minimum that,
This is a good moderate. It's a good amount of trees.
Okay.
We still have to plant the right ones to give you that shady, street, but it's a good amount.
Okay.
Because sometimes I've seen places where it's 50, and I've been places where it's 35. And I think 40 is kind of in the middle.
So, what I'd like to ask is this. With the clear cutting of the land is problematic for me. It is problematic for the community, and it is against our tree ordinance. So what I'd like to know is there something that we can put in to this particular section or somewhere in our ordinance that says, to the greatest extent possible, we're going to preserve the native species that are already there? Using brush arbor again.
That's it.
Right. But if
That's a great example of how that was integrated.
Okay, if you wait a few minutes, when we get to tree conservation at the end, that talks about the canopy and preserving the canopy. It'll be, I think, the very last section.
Okay.
And
So
that, and it
before
has, right, and it has, we have to do a tree canopy study first, so we know what trees we have, but then it will preserve that canopy at that point. It sets this is what we're going to preserve.
So are we going to talk about the type of trees in this discussion?
I didn't put it in here, but it's in the
Okay.
packet. It's the whole list of all the trees by sizes.
Just an observation, we all know about Bradford pears and the problem that comes along with them.
They're not on the list.
Yeah, but the other thing was crepe myrtles. We use crepe myrtles a lot in the 2000 era. And now what we're seeing are busted lines because of the way that we maintain crepe myrtles. We cut them back in the winter, and then the roots seek water, and most often the landscaping was adjacent to homes, and so those roots are breaking into plumbing, which is in private houses. So I've heard that a lot from Willow Bend community, which is a senior community.
I'm surprised with crepe myrtles. I've never heard that of them going into pipes. That's a new thing on me. You might call it irrigation line, but I've never heard it going into the actual sewer lines for the house.
I may be wrong, but the problem was that the root system is now, I don't know what line is hitting,
Mhm.
but it is growing underground and seeking, that didn't sound right, that's what roots do, they grow underground. But what the citizens have told me is that it is now a problem because it is planted so closely to the house.
Okay, Eric, we will look into that.
All right. Any other questions for this section?
But excuse me, Mayor, that's only if it's maintained and cut back every so often, is that what it is?
Well, if you don't cut it back, then you're gonna have this, I didn't even know crepe myrtles could grow that large, but they really can. The standard practice is that you would cut them all back when they're close.
If there's a power line, you can trim it back, but
I mean, even the ones outside of City Hall, we do the same thing.
it's called knuckling, and it's not good for the crepe myrtle.
It's not good, but that is
That's
the
the
practice,
standard,
yes. But if you grow them wild, you can have these really huge bushes, which makes it non-ornamental for landscaping.
Well, in the list, it's listed as small tree, it's not listed as a shrub. So, and it's also safe to put under power lines because it doesn't get too big. But there's plenty of trees in that small list that can also alternatives. And we can, I've done it before when I've worked at other places. When a big development comes in, I look at the number of trees, and I have mentioned in here, at least for street trees, we don't want monoculture, which means you have to call all the same trees. So probably what I can do is add a section about having mix. You know, you can have 10% crepe myrtles, 20% something else, and just, more of a mix, like a forest would have. All right. Next is commercial landscape requirements. There's a 20-foot landscape buffer along public right-of-ways. If you put in a cross-buck fence with the pillars, or you put in a masonry wall, it's a 15-foot landscape buffer, 4 feet tall, and it would run adjacent to the public right-of-way. It's just a little bit narrower if you put the fence. We save them a little time. Next is 1 medium or large tree and 1 small tree for every 2,000 square feet of impervious surface.
And I would be interested in knowing what their density is,
Okay.
because we need more of that.
All right. I mean, we could lower the square footage to 1,500 or 1,000, and that would create a lot more land.
I don't know what the sweet spot is,
Yeah,
but
I'll do some research. And just look
I'd
at it.
say more is better.
Yeah. All right. The next section is parking lot landscaping requirements. So parking lots, 10 or more spaces, this will apply. 1 island or peninsula for every 10 continuous parking spaces. Y'all are familiar with what a peninsula is in a parking lot? Let's see. I think I had, there. This is the breakdown of a parking lot. End caps at the end of each row. 1 medium to large tree plus shrubs, grass, or ground covers. A planting strip with a minimum width of 5 feet for every 2 parking aisles, with 1 medium to large tree for every 10 parking spaces, plus shrubs, grass, and ground covers. If you look over on the map, you see if you look on the left and on the right, you have a planting strip between the parking spaces. You can't pull through. The interior lot landscaping shall be a minimum of 10% of the site area, not dedicated to required property buffers, streetscape landscaping, or buildings. And additionally, on any building side facing the interior of a parking lot, except those sides with pedestrian access to the building, openings for windows or overhead loading area doors or motor vehicle bays shall be planted with landscaping that provides visual breaks along the blank building facade. The landscaping shall abut the building and be comprised of trees, shrubs, or ornamental plants in any combination provided that at least 50% of the total required plant material is shrubs. So this is along the backs and the sides of the buildings to make them more attractive. And then here we have the picture of the parking lot. Do we have any questions?
Bill, I do have a question. And you're so thorough, it probably is somewhere in here, and just shut me up if it is. But in terms of ground cover, I'm just mentally right now thinking about certain commercial areas and how they've used boxwoods and other shrubs, and over time those plants begin to die and thin out, and then it's the pine straw that's just bunched. It's not, they're meeting the requirement of the code, but in terms of being visually appealing and looking as though it's kept, that is not the case. So how have we addressed that?
That's why ground covers has been added. Because, like Asian jasmine, English ivy, there's plenty of different ground, various ornamental grasses like Lariat can be planted around the bottom of stuff. And I don't like seeing big mulch beds, it just looks bad.
It does look bad.
Especially when they don't maintain them.
A particular space now, but, so you've addressed that
Yes,
in this.
ma'am. I like to see the least amount of dirt.
And I just wanted to add, if we have any properties that are not being kept, then we do have our code enforcement team that could go out and write the notice to comply.
I think the problem has been that they've met our standards, and we're just trying to give a higher standard of maintenance.
Well, I think part of it is we need to get them under control first, and then come back and say, okay, this is your original planning scheme, you're missing plants, and you need to replace them. So that take time, it'll be over time with that.
Is there a certain width on your planting strips? Require that?
Well, according to what's written here is 5 feet.
5 feet?
That's the minimum size. I mean, if they want to do 8 or 7, we're more than happy to let them. But 5 is the minimum.
I don't know about making this a requirement, and I would appreciate conversation from everyone else. But I know we have encouraged developers when they come in and builders to use some red planting materials. Geraniums are very labor intensive.
They
But
don't like the heat.
Yeah, we are the geranium city, and sometimes when you've got different plants that are appearing to be red, it gives the illusion of being geraniums.
You want red flowers, basically.
But I want everybody else to chime in on that as well.
Do y'all want businesses to have annual plants, flowers planted, or we gonna just let them get by with shrubs and everything else? Because we can require annual beds
I mean, that's
within
good.
reason.
I think every land should, if we are truly McDonough beautiful, then every land should be, how do we make this more visually appealing?
Okay, I'll add some annuals and perennials.
Because with more colored flowers, I know you said geranium red, and you may have some rose white bushes, so mix, yes.
Or really just some red rose bushes that, that would be perennials that could come out automatically every year.
I mean, there's plenty of reds out there, and there's over 200 different types of geraniums, not just necessarily.
Right.
There's trailing and
that we have in Florida, which are very different from the ones here. But when you use things like lantana, and you've got wax begonias that are red, and it's all just a montage of different red plantings, you just psychologically kind of think you're looking at geraniums unless you know what geraniums are. And sometimes we can get away with not having them. I'm not trying to make it a mandatory thing,
But
but
you just want red.
we want to have a reason for being the geranium city. So that's what we've been trying to do, is artificially infuse geraniums now that we don't, is it Ogletree or Ogle? What's the name of the company?
Ogilvy.
Ogilvy, that used to be here, the major manufacturing horticulture growing company, no longer exists. So we don't want to change who we are.
Right, that's understandable. So, but we want predominantly red and the flowers, say 50% are red. Is that a fair amount?
That's good. I have a question for,
Yes, sir.
and I think this will come up in code enforcement, but it's applicable here. It got me thinking about it, and this is probably more for our attorney. This is a lot different than when you grandfathering. In other words, we're increasing our standards. We're raising the bar, and so it's not for a business now to say. And I know we're going to do this gently in the right way, but it's not for a business to say, well, my business has looked terrible for 10 years, and y'all can't make me come down and try to, improve upon it. Can they? It's different than a zoning situation. So I'm asking the attorney, I guess.
Yeah, when you have public safety issues that are regulatory and public safety related, you can get past the non-conforming, the grandfathering. So you can't grandfather yourself, into maintaining a building in a way that, is a threat to public safety.
Okay. Thank you.
But I think what we can do is if, say, the bank across the street, Bank of America, if they want to spend over $25,000 on their building, we could kick it in that if you spend this much, you have to at least up your landscape requirement to, what you can fit. We can't go and say you have to do a 20-foot buffer, but we can say, then you're gonna have to meet some of the landscape requirements that are current.
And it's certainly one of these things that is good for them. I can't help it. I drive by some of these businesses that don't take care of their property and lawns. I don't want to do business with them. I'll go down the street to somebody that is taking care of their property.
Right. Okay. I agree with this. I used to do downtown New Orleans. If you ever see, I'm going to say the bad word, Saints games, and they'll show the welcome to downtown New Orleans signs. That's landscaping that we had, that the city put in to enhance, because we don't laugh, but when people see flowers, they don't see the ugliness. They see the flowers and they think, oh, everything's beautiful. So, all right, so.
Before we move on, just to add on, what I would recommend here is just an opportunity for residents to comply, so like a phase-in period. I think that was just previously recommended, as well as maybe a notice type provision, because it's going to be the zoning code change is so exhaustive. If you want to actually see these improvements, I think we just have to consider and maybe discuss in-house means for updating, the public to know.
Yeah,
that this
most
is
of
something.
this is not going to apply. They'll all be grandfathered, at least anything existing. So
Okay.
this will be for new properties more than anything else.
Okay, and that's the way it's written
Yeah,
currently?
it's pretty much, that's just common with
Okay.
the new stuff. When this passes, then it kicks in. Anything before it will be grandfathered. Now, if they do substantial change, then we can go back to this. If they break, from the grandfather, which like you change the size of the house, or you do, like I was saying, spend over a certain amount of money, then we can ask them to meet the current code to the greatest extent possible.
Okay, and what subsection is this?
I don't know.
Okay,
I'll,
I'll look for it.
all right.
So I
Not
have,
send me an email, I'll find it.
I have a question, and Amelia, we don't have to have an answer now, but that is concerning to me with the majority of our city already being built out. It's not going to change the look. If we are implementing a grandfather clause without making sure that people are complying with the new standards, then we got the same look that we have now. So what can be done?
I know in New Orleans, oh,
I'll
sorry.
say something. So one of the things we are looking at for next year is a tree planting program. So the tree planting program would be for the residential communities. We would have to look at the commercial, but some of our corridors can also benefit from a tree canopy or tree planting program. And so that's something we're working on, where each resident can call in and possibly get 2 trees planted in their yard. And so that can also enhance in terms of beautification in the neighborhoods. And we can kind of look at some stuff in terms of some of the existing commercial properties that we have.
If we could focus on our commercial corridors, the arterial roads, because I'm a little bit concerned about neighborhoods, because you've got many of them have HOAs. And so the HOAs already have certain requirements. But what I'm seeing along major roads like Highway 42, and we talked about this last time, are the fencing, and there's no screening, and everybody's fence is different, and it just looks bad from the outside. So I can see a planting there for the purpose of screening. I think that is more needed than trees in their yard. And I don't know how that works legally with our providing trees in a residential area. Are we responsible? Is there, are we responsible, or is there a provision somewhere that makes us not have an issue with it being private property?
So we did this in DeKalb, and it was through Trees Atlanta. We worked with Trees Atlanta to do a program, and so with that program, Trees Atlanta came out, and it was requested, if a citizen came in and they requested trees, we would put 2 trees on their property in the front. And also, we had as part of, and I know we're going to talk about it a little later, but as part of the tree bank program, which also was part of Trees Atlanta, they came out and they put in trees along corridors and at parks and in some of the areas along some of the corridors that were not, that needed some attention. And so we planted trees along there, and we had various community projects and efforts that we did for this. And that's one of the programs that we were looking at in terms of our ordinance that we're working on.
And I don't have a problem with that being secondary, the private trees. You can run both parallel, but I think what is of great importance is how the corridors look.
Yes.
Anybody else? And this is very fluid. You don't have to wait to be recognized, so.
Yes.
Any other questions? The next section is parking lot landscaping requirements, and we are perimeter screening for residential use or zoning district. Use areas abutting on different development sites, and a minimum of 5-foot continuous buffer with 1 medium to large tree for every 35 feet, plus a hedgerow, grass, or other ground cover shall be provided between abutting particular use areas. So if you have the parking lot for CVS, then you got the parking lot for Walgreens, there'll be a landscape strip between them to divide them. There'll be a lot of trees and shrubs, so you'll have some division between them. Additionally, the design requirements, parked vehicles can hang over into the landscaping up to 1 foot. Now this, Are y'all familiar with when you're going to a parking lot and you have landscaping and the front of the car can hang over 1 foot if the curb is low enough for your car to get up, so you can hang over it. So basically there would be a grass strip in front of the landscaping, just so your car or truck can overhang a little bit to get into a spot. Does that make sense? All right, and if not landscaped, in landscape, grass or ground cover shall be provided. Any questions?
Just the issue of maintenance.
We're coming up on it.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
I do.
Yes, sir.
I'm thinking about some, more like a subdivision that has, proper boundaries around streets, and it just looks like the Dickens, and, they're not taking care of it. And I'll give you a great example. I had a clear view off of Airline Road. People put their fences up, and now there's this piece of property, I'm assuming is part of the subdivision, that possibly the HOA should be maintaining, or maybe nobody knows who should. And it looks like the Dickens all the time. Is that addressed in here, or?
Well, I think that's a separate issue,
Okay.
but I'll look into it to see. It sounds more
I'll
like a
get with
maintenance.
Dickens, explain it better.
But
Okay.
I understood what you're saying. I drive around and look at stuff. So yeah, I understand. Sounds like they're required to have a buffer, but they haven't gone in and planted it. Because if you don't have a buffer, you still have to plant it to become a
Yeah,
buffer.
and the residents puts a fence up, and then they can't get there, they can't get their lawnmower back there any longer. They're like, well, good luck, whoever's, they're counting on the city, county, or somebody to cut it now, and
Right.
it looks bad.
Yes, sir. All right, the next section is detention pond landscaping requirements. Landscape plans are required. Ponds or basins shall be free-form. Minimum landscaping requirements for a detention pond are also part of this. A 6-foot wrought iron fence surrounding the pond. An 8-foot access gate required. This is something I added. That is always locked other than when maintenance is being performed. I was driving down Racetrack and I noticed a kid's bike in the retention pond. So I don't know what they're doing, but I'm like, shouldn't that retention pond be locked so you can't go into it when it's not being maintained?
Yeah, I mean, that's the purpose of having a fence around it, is to protect
Okay, well,
those.
now we have the language in there that has to be locked
lock will be
also.
fine, right.
Okay. And plants or turf along the banks of a retention pond shall not exceed 8 inches in height. I added that also because I've seen some of these ponds and they're woolly. And I think we have to set a maintenance bar for them. Okay, if you can't get higher than 8 inches, then we can enforce it at that point, but we set the limit of how high it can be.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, because they become too bushy.
Right.
Right.
I mean, they're supposed to be maintained and raked and cleaned.
So Bill, the 6-foot wrought iron fence, I do know there is an aluminum cast fence that some folks are using as opposed to actual iron.
Well, nowadays they refer to it as wrought iron also. I know I've been places in New Orleans are very particular on it. Next section is maintenance of landscaping. I got this from Henry County. You require your landscaping. You're given a notice of violation by the code enforcement. If you don't comply, then the city can step in, and if we want, we can fix the landscaping. We can eat the price ourselves, or we can add it to their tax bill and they pay us back. And this is, basically, I took it from Henry County. So if the county can do it, we should be able to with just the discussion with the tax assessor. But hopefully we don't have to do this a lot.
Does our attorney, you agree with that? I'm not challenging you, Bill, I'm just, do you agree with that? It's pretty, just do a little lien based on the maintenance we had to do, and it goes to their tax bill and it's all good?
So
Because I think that's great, but go ahead.
Well, so I did have a concern, just the due process component, and that's giving residents or property owners fair opportunity to, know that.
Oh, well, that's already part of it. This is just.
Sure.
on
Yeah,
top
so I
of
just
that.
would need to look at it. Because the actual provision, so I just need to look at it and I will make note to make sure that, reasonably believe those due process concerns.
Right, and I want to respect our code enforcement staff, and I don't want them to have to go to a place 16 times, we'll give due process, and if that's, 2 times, whatever that is, or 3 maybe at the most, and then we take care of it, and then they get their tax bill, and it's on there. Boom.
Yeah, so I certainly plan to look at this section.
Okay.
I'll definitely do that, Councilman.
Go ahead. How was it being handled before as far as when we did something for a resident that needed to be done? Because I'm thinking we're just billing them
I'm
for
not
it
sure.
individually is what I was
So we
thinking.
don't go on private property, first of all. The second thing is that what we do is we continue to send code enforcement out and they end up in the courts. So we haven't been able to just go on their property without authorization to do work. We do not have a provision for putting a lien on property. And so I believe that is what we should do.
Any other questions on this section? All right, the next.
I feel I do. So these areas that are outside the city limits of McDonough, on our map, you see how jagged, like the spokes of a wheel. There are some areas that is just understood that it's city property, but it's not. It's in the county. And I know our code enforcement is working closely on a peer-to-peer basis with other jurisdictions, but legally, Madam Attorney, is there anything that we can do to write a cross-jurisdictional violation for areas that are outside of the city? We catch a lot of flack for not making certain areas to be maintained, but it's because they're not in the city. And I don't think the county often realizes that it's in the county.
Yeah, so you would have to, the county has similarly requested the ability to come into the city for regulatory purposes. Most often the county does it when they own the property. But we would need to get a similar MOU with the county that would allow the city to exercise enforcement power. If we didn't have the county's permission, then if you proceeded under that, that would be a defense to prosecution.
Yeah, we probably need some sort of stipulations of within so many feet of McDonough, because we don't want to be going too far. If it's across the street, yeah, but, if it's 200 feet down, then, into the county, do we want to go that far?
We have one area in particular that we have constant problems with, and it is adjacent to the city on one side, and then it's the county, and on the other side is the city. So it's not quite an island, but it's right there in the city. And I wanted to ask the question as well, how is this related to county property in terms of their maintenance of property?
I really don't, the county is the county, and I don't know if we want to cross that line on county property within the city of McDonough. I don't know if that's a politics act, for sure.
Yeah, I'm asking that question because we're raising standards on how people, the appearance of properties when they are being rehabbed, the way in which it's being landscaped.
I do think that we do need an agreement between us and the county that any project within a half mile or a mile of McDonough city limits, that we're informed of it. That, and if it's, at least so we know what they're doing, and this may be something that in the future we'll not be having to annex. So I think we should at least should be able to at least make a comment sometimes.
So
Something going on.
that provision exists, am I correct, Amelia?
The ability to go after the county?
No,
No,
this
for
is,
them to send us notification of I guess, building or construction within a mile of the city. with our, our order is, but, just something that I've been in other places where the county cooperated and we did the same thing. If we were doing something next to the border, the city limit, we would
It's not-
send them a notice that this is going on, and we're just kind of asking for the same thing from the county. Just send us a notice that this is happening. We're not, just so we know in case we need to speak up and say, we're fixing to annex this.
Yeah,
We
it's
wanna
not
see that.
really the border.
Right.
Many of these properties are in the city limits, and that is what I am concerned about. There's one building that we constantly get complaints about, the look of it, and it is a county-owned property.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to go beyond the agreement that we currently have with these things coming into the city for notification. But if we've got a certain look and aesthetic, and then there's a building that's within that area that has a different type of planting material, a different type of fencing, what do we do about that?
That's definitely a legal question.
So it was not, because you, typically, whatever the facade is and whatever the design is, that was permitted, when it went through the previous process. So it sounds like you're saying there may be county buildings that the city didn't give any level of consent or approval to the facade or the outside landscaping. Is that, Mayor, maybe?
That's a part of it. I'm trying to be very discreet in how, not naming a particular building.
But could you send them a notice or something without status on there? From the store or something like that?
Any thoughts?
Yeah, when dealing with counties, my recommendation, and not just counties, just governments, period, my recommendation would always be to give them a notice. Because in most instances, when you give them a notice, photos, and then you have interdepartment communication, that's typically the best way to resolve it. Because when you resort to litigation, a lot of times the governments, it's not necessarily that they don't want to improve the property, they just don't want that level of regulatory exertion to be exerted on them. So it might make it unnecessarily costly where they are using procedural arguments to either fight to get it moved to the Superior Court versus your court, throwing out all these legal arguments as to why they have certain immunities, etc. So my recommendation would be before you resort to litigation with any government entity that you give them that notice and that interdepartment communication. And then if it becomes where that's being ignored, then escalate it to that next level.
I'm not seeking litigation. I was just seeking more guidance on how we integrate into what we're doing the same level of standards for other governments.
Well, I think based on what she says, she's saying that this is what I've always called it, we did it in New Orleans, is there's the director route where you go over the top, and then there's the bottom route where, me call the planner with the city, with them and talk back and forth instead of going the political route. Is just kind of see if we can take care of it without setting it up. And just like make a call or, hey, we got this building, can y'all clean up around it, that kind, a more down low way to do it.
Okay, all right.
Does that make sense? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. And one of the reasons is that just historically, there's been a tug of war with respect to the county's rights and the city's rights when it comes to enforcement and regulatory powers. And if you have the county give a presentation, it would be completely separate from the presentation that most cities would give with respect to what the city's rights are when it comes just to the zoning and the regulatory component. So to avoid that argument, if it can be brokered, interdepartment, which in most cases, in my experience, it can, I would just suggest, that route first initially.
And we did that in New Orleans because I worked for a special tax district. So we had money on top of, so, we had to deal with the city. My boss would come to me and tell me, he's like, okay, call your connections at City Hall and see if you can get them to do this. And he's like, if they can't, then tell me and I'll go to them. the top practice.
Right down here, we get a lot of complaints about BB&T and the type of screening that we're saying that you use during redevelopment, reconstruction. That is different from what the county uses, but the complaints are constantly coming to us.
It looks like a mess, and they're not doing, there's nothing going on, so why do you have to fence up if nothing's going on?
So in Amelia, that's really the heart of my question. If we're using a certain type of screening, we can use BB&T Bank as an example. If we're using a certain type of screening and requiring businesses within the city to do their redevelopment, revitalization, restoration, whatever, differently, then what is it that we can do as it relates to the county? If it's just having staff place a call, then I think we need to place that call today.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. You can, my recommendation would be to hold the county to the same standards that you hold any other entity, to reach out, to communicate, to coordinate. And if they give pushback, you know, when they say that this is beyond your regulatory scope, let them give legal reasoning behind that.
Okay.
Like when we get the MOUs that they put forth, that they present for you for signature, you guys don't see this behind the scenes, but I'm routinely deleting out language where they're putting in the whereas clauses, whereas we're seeking permission from the city on this, but the county rightfully has the ability to, you know, do this and this and this. So I'm like, no, we're not going to put that in the whereas, so we can create, you know, precedent where we're agreeing that you have beyond the scope of authority that you have. But my point is that they want to limit your enforcement capacities, and obviously the city wants to expand it because they want, even if it is a government, it's still to be in conformity with the city's vision. So because it is that gray area, just treat them like you treat anyone else, but just make sure that there's that notice component where you do communicate with them and convey the problem to them before you take any substantial action to push your regulatory authority upon them.
So I have one more public disclaimer for anybody watching or listening. This is not an attack against the county. This meeting is for the purpose of design standards, and so we are lifting up areas of concern on today and how we should address those concerns moving forward. So all of us stand to create better ways in which to collaborate, and this is one of those areas. So please be very clear in your understanding that this is not an attack against the county. We are just raising the bar in McDonough. Thank you.
And to piggyback on that, I know Mayor and Council agree. We're also not raising the bar for everybody else, but for us as well.
Maybe having a yearly inspection of ponds. That way the property owner knows if they need to do stuff. And that way we also know they're being upkept. And we could, charge a fee, do so many every month and just, think about it, every commercial, every, new residential area, they all have retention ponds. I guess it's a growing problem.
To Mayor's point, I know what she's saying is that, we have people that say, well, we had an HOA, but 9 years ago, the president moved to Louisiana, and we don't have any money, and nobody knows what's going on, and so who do we even attach the lien to,
I think part of it is we're gonna have to have an internal discussion about HOAs and what to do with them, and what happens when they expire, because all of them have an expiration date as far as I know. I think it's 25 years or something. And they have by law, they have an expiration date. So there may need a discussion with the Attorney General of Georgia to see if we can put some sort of renewal clause in it, that it has to be renewed. But it's, like I said, this is a discussion we need to have.
And it's a great one, because we could reinstitute a bunch of HOAs that have gone by the wayside. That's going to be huge.
Or maybe we raise our stormwater fee on HOAs that have expired. so that we charge them that way. I don't know, but it's a big discussion.
Yeah, Bill, I'm just going, and that should be a part of the rest of the HOA discussion that's taking place. But Amelia, if you could research the Georgia code on that, I wasn't aware that there was an expiration period. So I'd really like to know what our options are if there is an expiration in the state of Georgia.
And what does that mean? What does that expiration date for the retention funds?
Well, it's just for the HOAs in general that they expire at a certain point.
Meaning that they don't have to maintain them?
No, it's just that the HOA ends. It's no longer there, and who maintains after if the HOA goes away?
I had forgotten about that, but now that you mentioned it, I do remember that they do have expirations.
So that's our Attorney General discussion. All right, are you ready to go to the next section?
We are, but I'm sorry this is taking longer. If we could just maybe lift up stormwater, wow, I should have had.
I know it's a big discussion, those two items.
Yeah, the whole issue of these detention ponds, I'm thinking of one subdivision in particular that has 3 the size of a football field, and there is no HOA. So,
Who's mowing it?
who, exactly. And sometimes the trees grow up and the city has to go in and then cut them down. So we really need to have a separate discussion about this issue.
Mayor, if you remember Bill Tanner, Bill worked here. He actually maintained all of the detention ponds throughout the city before he retired and passed away. I just wanted to kind of let you know that. I don't know what happened. Oh, I'm sorry, Jack Tanner. Thank you for speaking. Jack Tanner. He did that. He had a whole list. I don't know what happened, all that paperwork, but at one time I know that he did all that.
So I have two comments about that. Overlook that community. It has always been a problem with the residents complaining about the detention ponds. And that is when the first conversation emerged about Arcadis and the fact that when we started stormwater fees, we were told that those fees would pay for maintenance of all of the detention ponds. And that has not been the case. So,
I have a question.
go ahead. Okay.
As a city, are we aware of all of the detention ponds that we have within the city limits? Or is that a stormwater?
Jack Tanner would have, because that's what Jack handled.
Okay.
Now, once he retired, and he retired a good 15 years ago, I don't know what happened to all of his paperwork and all of that, unfortunately.
So once we have a GIS person on staff, so we are working on the software, so we should be able to pull up all of that information in terms of where they're located.
And Sylvia, I'm sorry, I come right back. Sylvia, I believe that Brandon, that was one of the areas that he mapped when he was stormwater manager, so you might want to check in with him about that, because we were really trying to get an idea of where all of them were.
So that explains what you're saying about Jack Tanner explains Well Road, because there, we have a detention, the chief administrator.
Yes, ma'am.
Does that include the one on Well Road? What would the city be accountable for with the detention pond on the Well Road if it was a city detention pond?
Well, if you're speaking Well Road behind Sykes Manufacturing there, that is a city. Sludge Pond, city does own that property.
So would we be responsible?
If we own it, we're responsible.
Yes, ma'am, we've cleaned it up before, we've had trees in it before. Just like Well Road, you know, we went down and cleaned up Well Road, cut the trees back and opened that up.
Okay. I just would like to, I guess once we get that information, I would like to know, or know that the city knows where all the detention
I
ponds
know, I'm laughing because I was thinking somewhere that I've worked, we had a herd of goats, and they would drop them in like that area. The goats would go in, eat everything, clean it up, and then they'd load them back on a trailer, move them to the next spot. It's just funny, but I don't remember how well it worked out, but I was just thinking about the goats. It was funny.
Sounds like a great idea there.
Scott Bridge did that when Mr. Ted Strickland was alive. They did use goats in some areas.
But I do have a comment though regarding the detention ponds and what Tina was saying, how there was a certain employee that was handling those retention ponds and they were cleaning them out. And to me, that sounds logical for the city to do that, because after all, us and if HOAs are responsible, homeowners are paying property taxes, and we all are owners of the HOA, so to speak. So to me, that would make sense for the city to go in and clean those, maintain those areas.
I wish that we had a stormwater person in here this morning, but I do know that is the conversations over the years. The HOAs have been responsible once we determined the fact that there was not money that was being set aside for maintenance. Some of these areas also have been cut out in such a way that you've got individual property owners that own into the detention pond. So it's a huge scenario. And what would happen when Mr. Tanner was here was that some areas would be maintained, other areas would not, and we just did not have the bandwidth to address all of it. So this is a separate conversation. So before we get anything codified within this code, we really need to talk about stormwater issues, and the manager needs to be a part of that discussion.
So maybe what we should do is just, I'll pull these two sections on maintenance of detention ponds and landscape, and we can always put them in at a later date once all of this is worked out.
I mean, it may not be a difficult conversation, but I would say invite those individuals to come in. And there's another thing as well. There have been situations where the ponds are really sitting right in somebody's backyard. And when the trees are removed out of the detention pond, it looks horrible because all you can see then is trash. So if we could integrate some language about the landscaping of the detention ponds.
Well, there is landscape requirements for the detention ponds. So I need to speak to someone who's going water about trees going around it.
So we do have maps of all the private and city-owned detention ponds.
Perfect. Okay.
But we could also add language to this that when if we're gonna start taking care of their ponds, then they're gonna have to give us that property so that it's ours and never comes into an issue about how to get in, so that they can see the property in the city if we're gonna maintain it. Because we wanna maintain private property.
Let's do everything possible not to take it over.
Yeah.
I just want to add one other thing as we move forward. And I don't know the correct terminology, so I'm going to struggle through this. But the type of detention ponds where they are wider in length and breadth, that way you don't have to have the fencing. It is more of a natural stormwater retaining system, as opposed to having the deep holes and then having to screen them because of the potential for drowning or someone being hurt.
And we hope to redo chapter 18 next. That will be, we have other chapters that need to be updated also. And stormwater is one of them.
That would be awesome, because then you can pretty much maintain it with a lawnmower.
Right.
If it's just gradual. It's a good idea.
I know Louisiana, so wherever you dig a hole, the water fills it up. All of our retention ponds are water featured, and you see the subdivision of it, but this is Georgia, you don't have 16 inches of rain every year, so I don't know how we would be filled in here.
Does this get into retention ponds?
No. It's
No.
just the maintenance and the landscaping.
Okay.
That's chapter 18. So y'all want to move on?
Yes.
All right, buffer area standards. The owner of a commercial or industrial use or zoning district, a 25-foot buffer abutting single-family residential use or district is required. Also, a 25-foot buffer abutting RM 75 and existing non-residential use or district with no buffer present, a 25-foot buffer shall be provided by the residential developer. So there'll always be, it just depends on who's there first, who puts in the 25-foot buffer. So like if someone built next to us right here, and we don't have a 25-foot buffer between us and the bank. So if the bank gets torn down and the new business goes there, they would have to put the 25-foot buffer in to buffer this building. That make sense?
Yes, it does. And I'm glad to see this about the undisturbed. And I think it looks like we're going to talk about it on the next page too. But yeah, that people understand undisturbed buffer means undisturbed. Keep the bulldozers off of that, because there's really some nice, pine trees and other type, vegetation that's very natural looking. And I see they go in and, they just, it's like they lay awake at night dreaming about how much red dirt they're gonna, turn the next day or something. So, nothing against people that do that, but I do got something against them when there's a buffer there. Leave the buffer, stay out of the buffer.
Yeah. Additionally, the buffer strips preserved in natural undisturbed state, if possible. Sparsely planted buffers shall be enhanced with additional plant materials at our request, and also additional plants must provide opaque screen within 2 years. And on the next page, additional standards, undisturbed buffers cannot be used for parking, stormwater, detention ponds, or other structures unless approved by the director. Vegetated runoff reduction measures within a buffer shall be approved by the director. Buffer plantings must be native and approved by the director. Buffer area can be used for perpendicular vehicular access and utility easements. That means you can cross it, you can't parallel it. Cut through it as parallel to the buffer, but you can cut across it to the driveway. Vegetation, foliage requirements for creating a new buffer area, so it tells you how to plant it back if they take it all out, and tree protection requirements.
So what are we saying about the tree protection requirements? My specific comment is about pine trees. They are native, but they grow very shallow. And what we see during every heavy rain is that the power lines that come down are the result of a pine tree that's fallen.
Well, part of, at least I find interesting, is they put a lot of requiring evergreens into landscaping, and I like to see the sequence. I like to see less evergreens and more deciduous trees, so you can see, it's fall, it's winter, plus the pine trees are considered an evergreen, so that's part of the problem. But we can encourage them to plant more, and the requirements does get deeper into what has to be planted. I think it's like a 50-50 mix of evergreens and hardwood trees.
Okay. And Sylvia, we need to include at this point any information regarding what I call no man's lands. We've put, and I'll use subdivisions as an example. Laurel Springs, Willow Bend, we have that buffer area that's neither property owned by the city or either of those subdivisions. And we've got homeowners now, it's heavily planted in pine trees, who are saying that these trees are threatening their home because that subdivision is right around 30 years old. And we've just created historically these areas where that type of scenario exists. So we tell them that they can't remove the trees because it's an undisturbed buffer, but at the same time, it is considered a part of their property, but not a part of their property. I don't know if I'm making sense, but if you pull those two subdivisions, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay, what was the name of those?
It is Willow Bend and Laurel Springs. And it is a straight buffer that goes between the two subdivisions. And the problem is that the homeowners are now asking for those trees to be removed, but we told them that they can't be removed. And some of them have fallen into people's yards.
They can be removed, but they have to replace it. You can cut it down, you have to replace it with another tree. It's the rule. I don't know if they're not meeting that rule, but I mean, that may be something where we can help them.
So the argument is the city responsible, is the homeowner responsible? So
HOA property, it's theirs.
it's not HOA
So it's
property.
ours.
It's not,
No man's land.
and that's why I use that term.
We'll have to see who
That's
owns it.
something that probably we need to talk about.
Okay.
Yeah, if someone has to own the property, so you would just need to do a title report to see who the current owner of record is. And the city can always, if it's a public safety issue, the city can always initiate. It's a very relatively simple process under state law. It takes 15 to 45 days to have a proceeding heard, and it goes before the city municipal court. But it would give the city the ability to maintain on an ongoing basis and then recover it through a lien. And then the city, if it doesn't want to maintain it to perpetuity, the city can use that lien to foreclose on and then potentially purchase the property itself, which would be at no cost because likely if you expended, substantial dollars to maintain, then you can just buy it back for the cost of your maintenance, which would be a offset. Or you can sell it to someone else. So there's options to maintain and to recover your money.
Any other questions? All right, next we're moving into parking.
So before we move into parking, I just wanted to go back a little bit. I know we were talking about the ponds, and so I do have some updates. With the ponds, we are required to inspect the ponds every 5 years, all the ponds. So our Public Works Department has a consultant, or either the department themselves go out and inspect those ponds. And this is part of the yearly MS4 permit that's required for all the ponds. So I just wanted to give you all that information.
Mayor, can I give one additional update?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mayor. So there was just a reference earlier that Bill made to the 20-year HOA limitation. And I did peek at the statute right quick because it sounded like, Mayor, you wanted further clarity on that. And basically what, and Bill, if you could tell me, I think what you might have been referring to was at 44560. But basically this is a property land covenant statute. And what it says under that statute is that your HOA, as long as it was created 1993 or later, will automatically renew every 20 years. So you have the ability as a community to dissolve your HOA, but if you do nothing, it will automatically renew every 20 years and stay in existence. If you are beyond, if you predate 1993, then the statute says that you do not automatically renew unless there is language in those covenants that explicitly states that it's going to automatically renew. So what that means is that if you predate 1993, you had no notice that your covenants were going to automatically renew because there was no language in there, then they will definitively expire in 20 years. And you can remove your property from the automatic renewal by at least 51% of the members of the community agreeing to put the property and make it subject to the Property Owners Association requirements in Georgia. And if you do that, then it will have perpetual existence and you won't have the ability to opt out every 20 years.
Wow. Now, is that for all HOAs, or just condominiums, or are residential?
So the condominiums would be subject to the Condominium Association Act, and the HOAs would be subject to that 20-year restriction unless they purposefully, unless 51% purposefully subject the community to the Property Associations Act. And if they do that, then they're not subject to the 20-year renewal requirement.
Say that again about the POA?
So if you're in a community that predates 1993 and you were not automatically renewing, because if your covenants predate 1993, in 20 years your covenants are gone. Unless there's language in there, the statute says that, not the statute, but the courts have declared that if there is language in the older ones that states that it's going to automatically renew, and that means that when people purchased that property, they knew going in that it was going to automatically renew, then those properties will continue to automatically renew. But if you're in an older community that predates 1993 and you don't have any language in your covenant that requires for automatic renewal, then as a matter of law, your covenants will expire after 20 years. And if your covenants have expired and you do not want them to expire, then you can take the steps under the Property Owners Association Act to reactivate and to bring that community back within the parameters of HOA and covenant restrictions. But you would just do it, instead of as an HOA, you would do it through the Property Owners Association Act.
I have a question. Can we require standard language that goes into HOAs if they're in common?
You can certainly require that for newer developments. I think you may have a problem requiring it for people who have.
I know for existing.
Yeah, for
at least
existing
the new
owners.
ones, you know, decent thing, you know, we can say at least for the new ones that this language needs to be included in your HOA.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And on that note, one concern that I have is that, and I think we've done a good job ever since I've been on this council, you know, for a new subdivision or something like that, you know, part of the conditional agreement that we reach is always that you must have an HOA, and they always agree. My concern is, I don't know that we ever literally get our hands on that HOA. That's not criticism of any, you know, but do we ever really get it and us go through it and make sure that all the elements are in it, that we wanted to be in it, you know?
So that is, I was just gonna say that has not been a part of it, but what we have asked for in the police department as a part of this as well is for HOAs to register with us. On our plat, we just say it has to have an HOA. That doesn't require that they submit their declaration, their covenants, none of that. So we don't even know what their standard structure is for the HOA, because that has not been a part of what we've been doing. And I don't know to what extent we even have jurisdiction over that. So I'd like for us to kind of flag, Amelia, at some point in the future, just having a meeting about HOAs and all of these different nuances in one singular meeting, because there are a lot of groups that we're working with right now where there are many problems. And I understand that there's some state legislation that's currently underway as well.
Yes, Mayor. So actually, you and Councilman Reeves and the council's discussion on this is actually right on point in alignment with what Sylvia was thinking about, because she did send me correspondence asking me to consider and give guidance on this exact issue. And I have researched it, and I haven't given it back to her yet, but I can tell you what my findings were. You can place HOA requirements within your code. There are multiple cities that do that. I did look through your code, and you do not have a HOA requirement currently. In fact, your subsection 1612.040 says that you want the applicant to tell you whether or not it's going to have an HOA. So I didn't see anything that requires it. So my suggestion was going to be, I have a list of options for her that I plan to give her, but my first option suggestion was Doraville. I think Doraville has a really nice requirement. It basically says that, and I'm reading it now, it says any new residential development or assemblage of more than 3 attached or detached single-family residential townhome condominium lots for residential purposes shall be required to have an incorporated homeowners association. And I thought that Doraville's was nice because it also has a rental cap restriction, and it requires that not only do you have that HOA, but that you put a provision within those covenants that says no more than 20% of the units are available for rent.
That's exactly what we need, I think.
So I'll make sure I get this over to Sylvia, because she did inquire and ask about that to incorporate into your code.
That definitely answers many of the meetings that we're currently having with HOAs and the police department,
And you
so.
said this is section 16?
So if you want to look at, so the code section in your code or the one in Doraville's code?
No, well, I thought you had mentioned something about our codes.
Yeah, your code subsection 1612-040-D17 says that the property owner is supposed to tell you whether or not they're going to have.
Yes, okay, so that'd be one thing that we're.
Yeah, you would need to amend that to where they don't give
Okay.
you the direction, but, and then replace that with this new update where you give them the direction through this code section that they're going to have an HOA.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, you ready to move to parking standards? I handed each of you what is existing. It was easier just to give you the existing than add the new to it. All right, so all required parking spaces and lots shall conform to the following requirements: driving surfaces, drainage, access to public streets, locations, lighting, landscaping, and required parking spaces. Any questions on that page?
This is residential, commercial, or
All of it.
all of it?
So, I know that the retail businesses, or does it necessarily, does the plaza, like if there's a whole entire plaza with several different businesses inside, is there a standard, for the plaza? Because in that plaza, there's different businesses within it.
Right.
And some plazas, they have churches, some plazas, they have restaurants. And
In mine, when I look at parking, or when someone comes in to the plaza and they're looking at parking, I'm gonna add, at least I know from past experience, I'm gonna look at them, are you gonna have any restaurants? That'll be the first one out of my, because then, parking and restaurants is much bigger amount. And I've noticed it pop up a couple of times here that it's becoming a problem here. So I'm trying to get ahead of it and make sure that we're monitoring required parking when we put stuff in, and to making it part of the report. So when, in the future, if someone wants to come in and put another restaurant or something, I can look back, this is your required parking. When this development was put in, you told me there was not going to be any restaurants. So when I determined your required parking is required, I did it for an office or retail. So if you want to put the restaurant here, you're going to have to add additional parking, or you're going to have a agreement with a neighbor that has sufficient parking to park in their location. Is that too much?
Well, I want to tag team with Councilwoman Mayor Pro Tem Varner. We have some situations where we have restaurants and churches have moved next door. And there's just not enough parking.
Well, that's, yeah.
And so I'd like to know how we will handle this, because it's actually being detrimental to the businesses that are already there, and I am not anti-church.
Oh, I'm not either, but if they're going to a shopping center, they, when they come to get an occupation license from us, I'll have to check the zoning and look at the back and see how much.
To each other. Do we have some kind of way where that can be connected?
That's in here, it's access
Okay.
management, is part.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, we're continuing with parking standards. The location of required parking, spaces on the same lot, additional off-street parking within 400 feet or cross-parking agreement required. So, say with the church, you have Walmart next door, which has more than enough parking. They can have a legal agreement with Walmart to use their parking. That's what a cross-parking agreement is. You're using somebody else's land to help meet your requirement for parking. There's shared parking arrangements, access and maintenance of off-street parking spaces, Americans with Disabilities Act, maneuvering, driveways, stacking lanes for drive-through facilities or service windows. There's vision clearance, side triangles, pedestrian circulation, maintenance, and EV charging stations. Those are all covered in parking standards. Any other questions?
I have a question, and I don't, but you know how we see a lot of these veterans parking spaces as well as, I know that, but it's a city, but you know, the veterans parking spaces, the moms parking spaces, I know we can't, and they're just doing this.
Yeah, that's just the business owners. Handicap is required.
Okay, so
that's
those
just,
are required.
they won't do that.
And the electric are required as well.
Yeah, we're adding it in there.
So we're just discussing required parking spaces.
The next section is.
Bill, I'm sorry, let's go back. And the rationale for including electrical vehicle charging stations right now, we're gonna have more than 10 in the city.
Mhm.
Plus you've got the private areas over at South Point. Is there a reason for making this a part of the site standard?
Well, I think it's the growing demand for electric. I mean, that is what they're pushing for the future. And I think basically what we're gonna be doing is getting ahead. It's not, you know, we don't want them to go 100% electric in 5 years, and, you know, the city of McDonough doesn't have enough.
So are we requiring who they contract with for?
No, it's just we're requiring EV charging stations.
Okay.
So that'll be up to them.
All right.
All right, now we're getting into the meat of this, which is required parking. So I'm going to go through residential with you. A single-family dwelling required is 4 for each dwelling unit, which means 2 in the garage and 2 on the driveway. That's why we require a 30-foot driveway. So actually, if you don't fill your garage full of stuff, you can park 4 cars. For a duplex, triplex, and quadplex, it's 2 spaces for each dwelling unit plus 1 overflow per dwelling unit. But if you have company, you need an extra spot. Multi-family dwellings, it's 2 for every dwelling unit plus 15 overflow spaces per 100 units. The same thing, it's guest parking. Group homes and personal care homes, 1 space for each bedroom and 1 space per employee on the largest shift. Housing for the elderly is 1 for each 2 dwelling units. And a bed and breakfast is 1 for each guest room plus 1 for each 2 employees on the largest shift. Any questions? All right, agricultural uses. Farms, urban gardens, seasonal sales made on premises. So it's 6 spaces plus 5 per 1,000 square feet of ground area. Any questions? Yes, sir.
This is, and we can talk about it later too, and I was going to, about questions from yesterday,
Okay.
but in reviewing that, I noted, you noted that you were removing from the R200 the agricultural language, and I had a couple of things, with concern that I wanted to share about that, and I would like to see that not happen, and we can talk about that later. But I know that when you say for agricultural uses, it was like earlier you were kind of writing out most of, you're writing out agricultural,
Well,
and so I'd like to talk about that, but we don't talk about it now.
Okay, we'll talk about it later.
Okay.
All right, any questions about agricultural uses? All right, educational uses, nursery schools, kindergartens, and daycare centers. 2 per 1,000 square feet, plus 1 per 4 employees, for each 4 employees on the largest shift. Schools, public, private, elementary, middle, is 2 per classroom plus 1 space for each 8 seats in the auditorium or assembly area where seating is fixed, or 1 per 50 square feet of gross floor area of the auditorium or assembly area where seating is not fixed. Stacking for 20 plus cars must be provided on site. So, you know how parents drop off their kids and pick up their kids instead of putting them on the bus? We're just saying you've got to be able to hold at least 20 cars on site for people picking up or dropping off. Continuing, senior high schools, 1 space for each classroom and administrative office, plus 1 space for each 4 students based on the design capacity of the school, plus 1 space for each 8 seats in an auditorium, and the same as what we mentioned before. Trade and vocational business and dancing schools, colleges and universities is 5 per 1,000 square feet in a classroom based on planned classroom, plus 1 space per each 8 seats in an auditorium, just like we spoke to previously. Because normally, if you have a school and you have a big gym, and you have to meet, normally if you meet the requirements for the gym, that will be more than just what's based on the classrooms. Or if like a senior high, that works well for middle school where you don't have students with cars. When you get to high school, you know, you have more. So normally in high school, you combine the 2. So it's 1 per class, you know, every 4 students, plus you still got to meet the requirements for the gym in case of a basketball game or etc.
So I have a question, I'll try to be quick. The school system is a different government, so in the same manner that we don't regulate county developments, how does this work legally?
It's that same, if they ask us, this is what we say. But they may just, because they're the school board, they may not even ask us, you know, what the parking requirement is for the school. Yeah, it's that jurisdiction stuff. Any other questions? All right, institutional uses. Hospitals, 1 space per bed, plus 1 space per 200 square feet of floor area used for outpatient treatment. Clinics, health, and medical centers, 5 for every 1,000 square feet of gross floor area. Medical institutions for children, adults, the aged, and assisted living facilities, 1 per bedroom, plus 5 per 1,000 square feet of common area. Any questions? All right, public assembly uses. Arenas, assembly halls, auditoriums, concert halls, convention halls, dance halls, exhibition halls, gymnasiums, indoor theaters, pool or billiard halls, stadiums, and similar indoor amusement or recreation uses, 1 for each 6 seats, or total parking area equal to 3 times the gross floor area, whichever is greater. Where there are no fixed seats, each 24 inches of bench or pew shall be considered 1 seat, and where there are no seats, benches, or pews, each 20 square feet of ground or floor area usable for seating shall be considered 1 seat. Golf courses are 8 spaces for each green. Public libraries and museums is 1 space for every 300 square feet of gross floor space. Places of worship is 1 space for each 2 seats in the principal assembly room. Recreation and community centers is 1 per each 4 seats where seating is fixed, and 1 per 25 square feet of assembly area where seating is not fixed. Any questions? I know this is complicated.
It is, Bill. I'd just really like to ask, how much more is included in this portion? Because I'm wondering if we could recess.
You want me to skip through the rest of this? I mean, it's just
Oh,
parking requirements.
just skip. Do you think you can
I
get?
don't think I need, do y'all need me to read each one, or can y'all, or next, just for show, is the shared parking demand calculations, and it shows you times and what percentage can be used for shared. After that, we have, this is handicap parking requirement. Forgot to finish the share. Just so you can see, this is the chart that determines the number of handicap. This is the size of your parking space. And, you know, if it's an angle or it's straight pull in, this is what this is about. And it has the minimum drive aisle width. So, see, the minimum is 12, but that's just, you know, pulling straight in. But in most cases, it's actually 24. 24 is easier to turn in and out of. But these would be the minimums. Yes, sir.
And so I'm thinking this does, I saw where you all talked about this the other day, I think the mayor brought it up, and, you know, about, this doesn't pertain to cars in the driveway, and we're lengthening the driveways.
No, this is commercial mainly.
Okay. And but we're good on the other that you all talked about.
Yeah, that's why we added 30 feet. The driveways are now 30 feet from the back of the sidewalk is where the 30s measure, not from the curb. So, and what I tell everybody, a Chevy Suburban is 20 feet long. So that's kind of how you determine. We have off-street loading and unloading standards for retail operations, including restaurants within hotels and office buildings with a total gross floor area of 20,000 square feet devoted to these, you know, to retail. You also have similar for non-residential uses with a gross floor area of less than 20,000 square feet. All wholesale and light industrial operations with a gross floor area less than 10,000 square feet. Office buildings, hotels, industrial and wholesale operations with a gross area over 10,000 square feet. And this is just a simple chart. Just shows you the loading requirement for different sizes.
Bill, when we come back, can you answer the question of how are we, the whole issue of event centers, grills, nightclubs, etc. How are we managing parking, limits, and all of that?
Okay. All right.
All right.
We're
So,
going to one, so we've got plenty of time.
oh,
Yeah.
I thought, I'm sorry, I thought we were trying to stop for 12 o'clock.
Right, we're trying to stop at 1. Let me just have a.
Okay.
12 o'clock? Oh, we are at 12, sorry. I'm getting confused.
So this,
I'm sorry.
thank you very
Oh,
much.
it's lunch at 1. I'm sorry.
One, Mayor, yes.
Okay.
Yes, we're all confused. It is Monday. All right. Most of this stuff is, we'll get to section 5. We're finally finished with parking.
Can we go back then,
Okay.
since we're not having to recess now? I just want to address the issue of, and I know there might be other questions as well, regarding event centers.
Well, if you look under the required parking, it's broken down for each type of use. So like retail sales, there's bars, taverns, restaurants, and it's based on one space for every 100 square feet of the entire facility, or one for each 4 seats based on maximum seating capacity, whichever is greater. So that's how, you know, if you tell us in advance that you're going to be a restaurant, we'll use this. You know, if you come in a shopping center and you're the first restaurant in there, then you may not need this, but we'll work it out. It's basically what we did. We'll tell you, I mean, I had officers who told restaurants, no, you just can't go there. You're going to have to find more parking if you want to go in this space, because that's not our job to help you find parking.
How does this information translate to the business owner? And this is what I mean. There's something that's properly zoned. I come in, I get my business license.
Well, when, I don't know if we currently do that. Do we verify parking?
We currently do not do that. It's done with the building official. or should be done.
That's not done through plan.
Mayor Pro Tem, do you have any questions?
That could,
I do. So, are these the current, my first question is, are these the current calculations?
these are the new, or what I gave you is the current.
Okay, this is,
No,
oh,
I gave you a separate
I
handout,
got it,
and that's the current.
okay.
We got a little more detail into parking requirements.
Basically, I mean, the whole parking thing is just mathematics, right? It's just
Yeah.
calculations.
I mean,
That's my first question. My second question then, because I see the entertainment, that will fall up under the restaurant?
no, that's,
nightclub,
that would be under public assembly,
public-
would be an event, would be an
and the
event center,
restaurant, and the, restaurant,
is under,
nightclub,
would be under retail.
it'll be under retail.
And as you can see, the first one is bars, taverns, and restaurants.
Must be on the wrong page.
This is, it should say, if you're on the PowerPoint, this is probably, it'll say, site design standards, required parking, and the second one would be retail.
I see.
That would be, and if you go back one page, I believe it's one page, it says public assembly uses. And that first big paragraph would cover an event center.
Okay, so if it's in a shared plaza like we were discussing earlier,
That would be something that, well, if it goes through planning, I would be sitting there and, you know, looking at the map and then working with whoever wants to put business in there of how to, you know, best reach the, or at least compromise. You're not always happy, but at least, you know, you're,
So when we're talking about the standards, and then that will become shared parking space, correct? And so is there a percentage at that point for the bars, taverns, and restaurants,
if they're in the event center,
if they're in a plaza?
right? Because that's what I learned when I worked in Jefferson Parish, is when someone comes in with a strip center or a plaza, you ask them, what mix are you gonna put in here? And that way you can determine, I'm like, are you gonna put a restaurant? No, and I would tell them straight out, okay, if you're not gonna put a restaurant, then I'm just telling you now, you cannot put one in the future because you do not have parking.
So my question is, when it comes to the plaza and it becomes then a shared parking space, does that adhere to the weekend, the 6 p.m. to 12 a.m., and it'll be a 100% shared?
It's,
Oh, wait, so they can take it up the
yeah, it
capacity of the
depends.
entire plaza?
It's a whole, if they want to, if the agreement lets them, they can.
Okay, so then at nighttime, where it says 12 a.m. to 6 a.m., that's only 10%?
It just, really when it comes down to it, it's, if you don't have enough parking and you go next door and get parking from them, they have to meet their required parking plus whatever, you know, they can, if they operate at the same time.
But if they're not operating at the same time, they can take up the entire
Yeah,
parking space.
if nobody, no other tenants open at that time in that shop, they can take the whole thing if they want. But I don't think we want that type of events, do we?
We don't. So what do you do? Because, and let's be honest, like if I went to a College Park and I went to back in the day and I went to a shopping plaza, then, and we're at the, you know, at a nightclub and we take up the entire parking space at the nightclub, then what is it the city of College Park or the city of Park Lane or what do they do? If that's not what, you know.
Well, you know, from New Orleans, so we kind of use some parking wherever there's a spot to park, including on the street. There's many different ways that you can do this. If the street's wide enough, we can allow them to use on-street parking to meet the requirement if they need to. But that's up to us if we are going to allow them to do that. I've done that in situations. But I know when I do it myself, I'm gonna look at them, I'm gonna look at next door. If they're gonna share from, say, let's talk about, Deadman Busters out here. There's a growing problem with parking, because they have shared parking, but it goes with DJs, and then they're building a hotel. And right now, looking at the map, they're running short. But sometimes you just have to close your eyes and hope that things work out. And regulate it as much as you can, but sometimes it's.
So can we at least regulate, for the permit of time for entertainment, for lounges, nightclubs? So at the end of the night, 2 a.m. is supposed to be our cutoff time for your lounges.
Right, well, that would be,
Sell
it
alcohol.
would be part of their agreement with whoever they're getting additional parking from. Now, if there is no agreement between the two, and they're just taking parking, somebody's going to have to say something.
So how do you monitor that after a large amount of space? Who monitors that? Like who would that be, code enforcement? Would it be?
Normally it'd be somebody calling in and complaining. And then we would go in and then look at it and tell them, you're overflowing, you're not meeting your parking requirements, you need to make an illegal agreement, whoever you're getting additional parking from, and at least make them, but it's a legal agreement, so you can add the times that it's available for them.
So what you're saying that what we have in front of us is a guideline or a regulatory, but once the complaint comes in, then there's no, policy or guideline on how we,
I'm in full support of what Mayor Pro Tem is saying. We need to take a deeper dive into this because we lost a prominent business in McDonough because they were a part of a condominium association. The store was a great anchor, and they were a part of a condominium association and only had a certain amount of parking spaces. And it was supposed to be shared parking.
Right.
And so they ended up having to move because they did not have enough parking, and it was in conflict with the condominium association. I can talk to you more about what strip mall it was and where it was and all of that. The other thing is, and this goes to code enforcement being needed on the weekend, you can drive through some of these areas and you can barely get your car through because there's parking, like you said, I think you said Home Street, is parking everywhere. And I think that goes beyond the parking requirements, but how do we even begin to enforce that? There are other zonings that or regulations that should be a part of that discussion. Sylvia, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So I've seen 2 examples. One of them I've seen is where the actual businesses put their signs up for parking for their customers only. The city of Decatur, their model is a little different. The city of Decatur owns all of their, I would say 80 to 90% of the parking throughout the city. And they have a company, let me see, or they have their parking person that goes out and monitors those parking spaces. And there's one parcel that is part of CVS and some other stores, and then across the street is Taco Mat. Well, you can't park over there and go across the street to Taco Mat, even though the parking in Taco Mat may be full. And they have people out there that are in plain clothes that actually put the boots on the cars, and they're part of the city. But they put the boots on the cars when they see people that are going into other establishments that are not part of the establishment that they're supposed to go into in that area.
there's 3 attachments, but how do we monitor those if it's included as an automotive repair shop, and then it then becomes, okay, we want to sell cars, and then that the car, that then becomes a car lot and it's not no longer a shared parking space.
I just wanted to say preach, but anyway, go ahead.
But I know what you're saying, and back when we did this on Thursday, when we were talking about uses, the uses, if you read down through them for automobiles, it says how many spaces for each stall. And it does explain if you're, what parking would be needed, or what would be included for parking.
If there's a shared space with auto repair, and then
Now,
it becomes a.
yeah, but with auto repair, the bad thing is you also have storage. This car's still getting worked on, and it's, you're waiting for a part. Or this one is sitting here because the owner hasn't paid yet. So it can get.
Even when it includes car sales.
Yes, that's a separate thing, but it would have to meet the requirements of the auto repair and the auto sales. It would have to meet both requirements, not just one.
So y'all need to have a conversation with some of these things that have been code issues. We've got some gateway concerns about that type of thing taking place, where you've got automotive sales and you've got parking for, it's automotive sales and repair. And code enforcement has said there's nothing that we can do about it. So we need to look at that.
We're working in Florida, we had auto sales because we were close to the auction. And we were very strict. I mean, you had landscape requirements, cars could be parked out there. If you want that, I'll give it to you.
But some of this parking is everywhere. It is everywhere.
All right, I'll add some more about auto sales.
In this conversation you all were having a while ago, it made me think about this question. I don't know if I don't remember you talking about it on the meeting the other day when I was viewing, but maybe under use classification, are we going to talk about primary use later today or anytime in this as far as the definition of primary use? And it goes back to a minute ago when you were saying your business application didn't say you were going to have a restaurant, and now so that comes into play?
I can address it.
Okay.
I'll make sure I go back and write something in there under the use that you have to say what you're going to put there, or at least what you picture. And then that's your stuff required parking unless you get more land.
Okay.
And Bill, how do you address this part where people are coming in initially, the developer of a particular commercial complex, and they've given you a ratio, and I'm happy to hear about the ratios because I didn't know that we were actually doing that. But there are situations where after a development has been in place for a certain length of time and then vacancies occur and it's never coming to us, they're going directly to the property owner and renting out their spaces and then coming here for business license. So how do we regulate or how do we maintain the business ratio?
Well, what we can do is when they come in for their license, is we check the parking requirements for them and see where we are right now. It's kind of a living document that, this is the Publix at Lake Out. We've got the Publix, we've got a Chinese restaurant, a Mexican restaurant, 2 delis, a karate place, a pet shop, a clothing store, and a haircut place, I believe. So each of those would have a different parking. We'd have basically at the top of the page, this is required parking for the shopping center from the beginning, and just subtract off.
And is there an industry standard for the ratio?
It's a little different for every place. It just depends, and depends on the planner and how involved they are when they look at it. So I want to make sure there's no problems.
I don't know that we're having problems now, but at one point we did have problems where you're older developments were, people were moving to the short, to the new shiny and bright. And so that left vacancies. And then a lot of the churches came in. But you may have had someone who was selling alcohol in that same complex. But what we say within our codes is if you're within 200 feet of a church, you cannot sell alcohol. I don't know that we have a check system that is regular. Yes.
That would, to me, it would be grandfathered, because if, you put, liquor store's been there for 10 years.
Not a liquor store, someone that sells alcohol. It's a restaurant or, somebody that's allowed to sell alcohol, and it being within that 200 feet of a church.
Well, my question is if it's a restaurant, or is it like a packaged liquor store? Because that would be, to me, a restaurant that sells, drinks, and a liquor store, two different things. Or, because if you have the liquor store, then yes, you can't, be within so many feet of the liquor store, of the church or the school or anything like that. But if it sells at a restaurant, I guess it may depend on the time of the day, maybe.
So, two things. We are not, we don't have a liquor store in the city limits of McDonough at this time. But our code speaks to schools as well as churches. And so there have been instances where we've had businesses to come in selling alcohol, and they were within that 200 feet, and we have had to address that. So I think the strong arm was on the side of the church because the area was originally developed to be commercial, but it is still an issue because the two zonings aren't necessarily evaluated at the same time.
I mean, I could see if it was like a street center with a restaurant already in it, then the church came.
Look at downtown.
Right. All right. Okay, are y'all ready for fences and walls? All right. Height of fencing or walls, 4 feet in the front, so that would be from the front of the house forward. The fence has to be 4 feet, or if you put a fence, maximum. And then from the front, at least this is the way I describe it, from the front facade of the house, back is 6 feet. And that would include, across the sidewalks. You do 6 feet, then go back 6. That makes sense?
What I do see now, somebody fencing, some they got a little high, they cover the whole yard.
That's something I wanted to add something in here. I'm glad you reminded me about corner lots. And I think at least the corner lot should have to be, if you put a fence, it needs to be half of the required setback from the sidewalk. Because I don't like walking next to fences. There are general standards. You have the subdivision interest features where you have a big sign that says, Grand Lake Homes or whatever. We have to address fence materials, temporary fencing, which may be what applies up here at the corner for the county is their temporary fencing. We may can add something to that. Other thing for fencing, do we want to require permit? Currently, we don't. We don't regulate the fencing that much. And then you have legally non-conforming fences and walls that were there before this code was adopted.